Deck building in Vanguard is a subjective topic that, in some cases, can be objectively hard to nail down. From face value, it may seem like you're just taking a few cards together just to make a deck. There is surprisingly more that goes on in order to create the ideal deck. In this video, we'll be covering the fundamentals of deck building in a D format and breaking down what exactly makes deck building such an important process. Ideally, this video may also help you the next time you'd want to go into building a list yourself. First, you have to start by choosing a deck. I know, obvious, right? But seriously, the deck building process starts with the nation you'd want to play. Dragon Empire is a nation that focuses on return and restand. Peter's Sanctuary is more focused on the rear guards. Stoic is a mixed bag consisting of orders, multi-attack, back row swings. Brangade is a nation that mostly revolves around their set orders. Darkseid combos out with their soul as their focus resource. And Lyrical Monasterio is just a lot of things crammed into a whale. But especially with the game having jumped to 13-whole main set and more upcoming, it's sort of hard to classify decks for your nation. So, alternatively, you could also look at decks individually as if you're playing a clan in itself with nationwide generics. So, after you've jumped over the hurdle of, oh, I want to play X deck, I'm gonna try building it now. What exactly should you do? Start reading cards. Jokes aside, research is your definite starting point. Firstly, you'd want to search for the specific support of the deck, either by typing in cards that are name-locked for reference to Vanguard, and yes, this includes the ride line. It might seem obvious, but you'd want to do a lot of reading in order to understand what your deck wants and how it'll achieve a win. You can also move on to what generic cards there are to fill in gaps, but we'll come back to this later. Cool. Now that I've read the cards, should I get going? Hold on a second. There's also another important step before you dive right into deck building. Referencing is important as a starting point to understand trends within building your deck. Thankfully in Standard, there's a lot of choices that will be clearly cookie cutter, but there's always still room for nuance and builds to best suit you. Often, the best lists to reference are the ones that do have results in tournaments. Sites like VG Paradox, Dexander, or even WCC's Top Decks hashtag are really nice resources to find your lists. It's generally a good idea to take a range of pre-existing deck lists and data to look at card usage or ratio trends that exist among them instead of sticking to one. So, should I just copy this person's list who won a whole regional tournament? Well, aside from the fact that sometimes you do have to take a grain of salt with questionable choices that certain players make with deck building, you also have to understand both how a deck will achieve its goals, each card's individual interactions, and how they impact both the deck's approaches and matchups. This also goes for cards meta's metagame calls or preferences suit a certain playstyle. It is also important to note that JP meta is vastly different to EN due to collaboration decks that currently do not exist in English format, such as the Bandori Nation decks, Tokanrabu 2, Want to Strike, etc. As such, it's important to consider that lists in Dexander or tweets and videos from Japanese players will include card engines and text more suited to their meta's climate. When deck building, it's fine to take ideas from another region, but make sure to acknowledge your region's current meta, what are the current threats, and build towards your deck's needs appropriately. Anyways, remember when I said you had to do a lot of reading? I wasn't exaggerating. Each card has a purpose in deck, either to be the focus of your game plan, supplement your game plan, expand your game plan, or disrupt your opponent's game plan. Mind that some cards can even fall into multiple roles. Cards that fall into the category of the focus are often what the deck wants to be built around, usually by either being the main vanguard or important rearguards such as roaming prison dragon, overdressed units, as they'll be carrying the deck a majority of the time. Cards that supplement your game plan are arguably just as important, but enough to where if you didn't open them all in the game, you can still perform decently well without it. Examples can include consistent boosters, huge power gain, provide guard restrict, giving draw power, introducing more shield value, and so on. Next are cards that expand the game plan that provide variety and sometimes introduce secondary win conditions, such as Strawberina's Board Wipe or Vivace in a Leonorn hybrid build. Of course, the best cards are the ones that do not hinder the main game plan or the power ceiling, but rather support the main game plan or are already incorporated in the flow of it, and can be used in a different application to fall back as a plan B. Lastly, cards that are meant to disrupt your opponent, and are there to say, screw you, deal with this now. This can come in forms of removal, stun, or be an actual annoyance of a card that can never really die and threaten your opponent in one way or another. It's important to understand how each card interacts with one another and create synergy in order for a deck to flow smoothly or provide responses for your opponent to deal with. These interactions are essentially the knowledge you'll need in order to grasp the idea of how you should approach a deck and each individual cards. And through understanding these interactions, especially if the main set of support given to the deck, you can also apply this to your deck building and by introducing more generic cards that fill in gaps with roles. However, not all cards are printed equal. Usually, card quality is determined by its opportunity cost. As, if I run X card, is it better than Y card? Some cards will objectively have more value, power output, utility, etc. as opposed to the others. Some will have arguably rough conditions or costs as opposed to another that is the freest thing ever printed. Overall, card quality is a bit tricky to nail down because ultimately all decks would want different things. But when looking at something, you can always ask yourself these questions. 1. How will this overall help the deck? Does it further my game plan? Does it fill in gaps the deck is struggling with? 2. What are the weaknesses of this card? Is it the cost and conditions? Is it slow to be committed on board? Is it because it's shieldless? And 3. Does the card improve or hinder the flow of my deck? Does it make life easier in improving card interactions or consistency? Or does it jeopardize and fail to further a plan by being dead in certain or common scenarios? Sometimes, these questions can't always be answered from the get-go and can require playtesting or further theory crafting in order to find an answer. There are also cards that can be Winmore pitfalls. Even though it will overall benefit the deck, it assumes that you're in a winning position to use it at its greatest value, and sometimes can end up as bricks within a deck. There aren't many Winmore cards that exist in Standard, but there are some applications where a card isn't inherently Winmore, and are usually used to further pressure or close out games, but can be used as a Winmore card, so be careful of how far you greed in game. Matchups are a massive component with how a player approaches deck building. Decks that fall into higher parts of the meta and usage rates are really important to take into consideration during deck construction. Imagine it as like a rock paper scissors game, except you're not really there and you don't even know who your opponent is. So in that case, you prepare yourself for the best and worst outcomes. Since Vanguard doesn't have an option for side decking and usually official events are best of one, accounting for who you might be likely facing against is important in order to see the best results. For example, as for English moving into the new Stride deck set and a triple drive set, running meta calls such as bracing Angel Ladder to shut down a Shiranui Stride turn, using a Siana Ride Line to potentially slow down or shut down early aggression, or even the 30k Blitz orders working against Youth Bricks, Stride decks, or even niche contenders. However, some issues can arise when a tech option meant for a specific matchup can either backfire in a different matchup, or be completely useless. Thankfully, this isn't always true, and generally the best cards are the ones that can be used in various situations, or have some sort of way of trading itself off. This is where ratios coming in for running tech appropriate to the context of the current metagame you're playing, or perhaps balancing to what you'd want to see, can affect your deck build. Even with 50 cards introduced this year, some decks still don't have enough space to run what they want, or hell would rather use the slots to bump up shield value. That aside, a good rule of thumb for running tech you wouldn't often want to see but might need is often played at 1 or 2 copies, of course depending on one's preferences. However, in the case that there isn't, this opens up another can of worms, seeing it in the first place. So, either you pull a god draw for this one niche situation, or somehow finding as the third last bottom card of your deck when you start packing up. So, what do I do now? Well, that depends on you, my friend, with how you want to adjust these ratios. There's plenty of choices you can make. Either gambling that you play against your ideal matchup all day and playing a certain tech at a high amount, cutting it completely and finding a different option that will improve your decks holistically, or playing it at a low amount and gambling on it anyway so that you'll see it when it's needed. Surprisingly, there is no wrong answer here. Rather, it's what impact the card holds that will make or break the justification. Thankfully, there are some decks and cards that can weave around this, specifically ones that can search off one-off copies from the deck, such as Lord being able to colony grade 1, Shadowcloak able to mill out orders to toolbox off drop, Opar ditching specific world orders, and Aura being able to fetch any necessary orders for a matchup, or they can bail out and search Elementaria. Triggers surprisingly can be very nuanced depending what your deck values and needs. Generally, most lists will opt towards 8 crit, free draw, or fronts. But on the other hand, a deck like Vineman Spruce would rather have 7-8 draws as the deck is unable to generate enough hand advantage outside of cards like Mabel for triple drive, or Siana who can capitalize on draws compared to crits since they can convert their 5k shields into 15k guards while also providing themselves a more sustainable hand. Now, you finally constructed your own deck. Let's go take it a look. Okay, don't worry, this is just part of the process. Playtesting is actually the most important step as it becomes your full anchor to adjusting every component of your deck. Namely, by taking your experiences, you can apply your results to your deck build through tinkering at any degree. Whether it would be changing a card ratio from 2 to 3, or cutting off an entire engine because you found it was too inconsistent. Winning and losing may seem like the best indicators of results, but realistically due to the nature of the game, there will be plenty of variables that may have affected why you won or lost. So it's better to look at these individual variables and towards how a certain choice in your deck building impacted your game overall. It could be whether a card allowed you to make better columns for pushing for a game, led towards deck thinning to increase your chances in flipping triggers, increasing shield that normally your deck wouldn't have been able to guard in a certain matchup, switch to running fronts to front and 2 passes, etc. Or perhaps in another matchup a certain card is absolutely dead and instead could have been a different card that is better in that situation. There really is no right answer, and even pouring countless hours into playtesting, even solved lists will still have their gaps and weaknesses. Inevitably, it's what you value the most when it comes to how you adjust your final builds when looking for your playtesting. By either playing for safety, or the absolute high roll, or even a jack of trades approach, players will build and play towards the right direction they envision. Hence, it's why playtesting is so important. By identifying what exactly needs to be adjusted through actually playing the game, you can build on top of that information to both suit you more and, importantly, improve the vision for both your deck and yourself. What's more is that this process is always repeating and finding even the smallest bits of micro adjustments. Sometimes you just don't want to break the bank. Cards are expensive and needing the budget for a hobby is important. After all, mom's credit card can only get you so far. Before explaining how to look for budget alternatives, do keep in mind that some cards are objectively irreplaceable. Generally, most of these will be options that can be as bad to where it may impact the deck's overall game plan in negative ways. although some can alter it to be played in a different yet positive application. That out of the way, reading again is your best friend when looking for your bulk full of rares and commons or even the VG card database. When trying to find budget cards, ask yourself these things. What exactly does my deck need in order to function and play out its expected game plan? What is it that I can/want to replace? And how will substituting card X for card Y impact the rest of my deck and my matchups? Take for example, Bastion Accord. Not many are able to afford the grade 4 package of Skylizen Prime and Forbital. Instead, a Bastion list can start substituting primes for grade 4 Bastion and bumping up formal Pujos and Knights to capitalize on drive check pressure on Accord, or substituting Skylizen with Darkstrain for boosters. Perhaps you can also build towards using Legrail and get 6 drive checks and free swings for the same amount of counterblast you'd use for Alden and Accord's drive check. Or say that you don't want to drop hundreds to find Rayleigh for Charmeau, Chantal being the second best option as a body at the expense of needing to use a counterblast, Clean also able to refund itself also using a counterblast, or Laura's set order which is costless in exchange for being shieldless and not able to refund itself. Objectively, these builds will be overall worse and more inconsistent than conventional lists, but they encapsulate a different strategy and with their jank can potentially hold results. But also, it doesn't have to be dedicated deck pieces. This can also apply to generic nation staples. Mythiarch, for example, can be substituted with Happy Dreaming Festa if you play Leonorn, Frozen Resentment, Command of Death Restraint, etc. Caber is another example that can be substituted for Codewalla or Izrod. Overall, deck building is probably one of the most underrated skills in Vanguard and is a skill that will continue to grow with you as a player. And that will be the end of the video. Make sure to like, comment down your thoughts or if we missed anything, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. We're actually really close to hitting 1.5 subs, so please become a statistic. Regardless, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next vid. Peace.